Hey y'all, thanks for being here with us tonight. This is our second edition of RecTalks, and we are really excited to introduce our panel. Just a little bit about RecTalks. These are informative and influential discussions with experts in the industry of sport, recreation, physical education, and wellness. These are hosted by Duke Recreation and Physical Education, and our goal is to provide resources and information that promotes the physical, environmental, and mental well-being of our global community. We would like to give a shout out to our friends at Hydro Flask for sponsoring this event and helping us to make this possible. So I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. We've got a really exciting topic to talk about tonight. A few housekeeping things. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. If at any point you have questions for any of the panelists, go ahead and drop it in there. We'll be monitoring that throughout the chat. This will also be recorded, so the recording will be available afterwards. And at the end of our discussion, you'll receive a brief survey with a couple questions. If you go ahead and fill that out, we are going to raffle off a prize from our sponsor. So make sure to check that out, answer all those questions, and that'll help inform us as we look to add some more topics. So tonight we are talking about the power of the outdoors. We've got a great group of folks that have both personal and professional interests in the outdoors. So we'll go ahead and kick it off and have our panelists introduce themselves. Let me start by saying my name is Chris Hendricks. I work as the Director for Outdoor Adventures at Duke University with Recreation and Physical Education. I have met all of these folks both professionally and personally through connections in the local outdoor community. So really excited to bring them here and get their perspective. So Jackie, why don't you go ahead and start and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Sorry. Hi, I'm Jackie Gerson. I am a PhD student in ecology at Duke. And I'm also the co-founder and co-director of Girls on Outdoor Adventure for Leadership in Science, or GALS, which is a free summer program for high school students from backgrounds underrepresented in STEM, where we take students out to Pisgah National Forest for 2 weeks and we go backpacking and teach them hands-on science. And they have the opportunity to engage with leaders as well as in a mentorship program afterward and be really immersed in the wilderness during that time. And GALS was originally started at Duke and it's now run by Frog Hollow and Catawba College.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. And if you could also just tell us what's your personal connection to the outdoors? What is, like where's that come from for you?
Yeah, so I grew up just going on local hikes, and the outdoors has always been the place where I can go to de-stress, gather my thoughts together, make observations, and also as an ecologist, it's a place where I can unite the science that I love with environmental protection and my curiosity.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. Walter, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Walter Munoz, and I'm the coordinator of informal recreation and our EcoVenture program at North Carolina Central here in Durham, North Carolina. And that EcoVenture part of my title is my connection to outdoor adventures as I program the outdoor activities for the university. And I've served in that role for 5 years now.
Awesome. Thanks, Walter. Sean, go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your connection to the outdoors as well.
Thanks. So Walter, yeah, well, I might be at Duke for 5 years too. So we might have started at similar times. At Duke, I'm the senior public relations specialist in the Department of Political Science. And but part of the reason I'm here tonight is because of my board service for Bike Durham, which is a nonprofit organization that tries to empower and encourage transportation and recreation accessibility to sustainable forms of transportation across Durham, no matter who you are. And so that's been, I've served on the board since the beginning of this year. And that means my primary work has been in response to COVID-19. But part of why I come to the outdoors and why the outdoors has a personal connection to me is connected to my relationship to documentary work. Some of what I do at Duke is documentary work, and my wife and I own a small wedding photography company. We've been working in that space for 10 years. And so the natural world has just this beautiful calling that we are interested in documenting, but it's connected to biking insofar as like biking is this wonderful way to like travel around and explore nature in a way that is just fast enough to kind of see it from angles without passing by. Faster than walking, slower than a car. And it just seems to fit really well if you want to have an aesthetic relationship to nature and appreciation of the natural world. So that's kind of where I came from at the deeper root level.
Awesome. Well, y'all, let's kick it off. And I'd like to just kind of frame the conversation for tonight and ask you all how you would define the outdoors or outdoor recreation. And Jackie, why don't we start with you on this one?
Sure. So I think the outdoors can be anywhere where you're immersed in the environment. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a backcountry setting in a remote wilderness area, though it certainly could be. And so maybe an example of that, this past summer, because of GALS and COVID, we weren't able to run our immersive 2-week summer program as usual. And so instead, what we decided to do was an at-home adventure where we gave all the students the opportunity to still connect with a group of their peers online. They would basically go outside in their backyard and make observations and then come back and report on it and go back and make more observations. And what they found was that they didn't have to go to Pisco, which is where our trips usually occur, in order to make really neat discoveries, to make scientific observations, and to see things that they had never noticed before. It was just right there and they had never noticed it before. So I think really the nature is everywhere around you, and the wilderness and the environment is anywhere you see something that's part of the natural world that's not human made.
I like that. What other thoughts?
As far as defining outdoor recreation, it's funny because when we had our pre-meeting, we talked about how some individuals, categorize it to like extreme sports. And that was like myself. So previously, before I got into this role, if I were to define it, I would think of activities like, water skiing or mountain biking, but now I know it can be something as simple as just getting outside and going for a walk, or just any leisure activity that's outdoors. Even if it's as simple as just being outside, getting some kind of environmental education. So like I said, my definition has transformed over the years as I've been in this role and been in the outdoor community more.
Yeah, absolutely, Walter. I think a lot of folks are in that same boat. Especially in the world we're living in right now, and associate the term outdoor recreation with maybe the term adventure recreation, or thinking that in order to like really reap the benefits of the outdoors, you have to do that extreme side. You've got to spend a week living out in the wilderness, but that's not necessarily the truth. What do you think, Sean?
I have a definition that might be willing to like butt heads with Walter a little bit, but I was thinking about this. And then how can we define outdoor recreation that's distinct from outdoor leisure activities, right? So for example, I started to think, what if outdoor recreation can be defined as something like playful techniques that are addressing outdoor obstacles? And if that's the case, then you can imagine like a cyclist pedaling up a steep hillside, a hiker searching for sure-footedness, a kayaker carving through the rapids. This would be distinct from outdoor leisure activities, which would be something like fishing, bird watching, and gardening, which are a little bit more passive. The concept of playful techniques is kind of like the precursor to sports, right? Because sports basically professionalizes playful techniques. And so that kind of helped me think through what outdoor recreation might be. But then there's some weird cases, like, for example, when people are playing flag football outside. Football isn't necessarily an outdoor activity, but there could be really intrinsic features about outdoor football in that context, like the weather, et cetera, that make it outdoor recreation. So I think that the definitions in these cases are easy to problematize, but we're thinking about, because we do want to have a sense of community. connected to the terms we use.
Hmm. That's an interesting take on that, Sean. I like where you're going with that, and I feel like that kind of ties in, Jackie's perspective and Walter's perspective in a succinct kind of way. So you all have done amazing things, both personally and professionally. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you have engaged your communities in outdoor recreation, and what was the impact that you've observed from that. Walter, why don't we start with you on this one?
Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, I work at North Carolina Central University. And for those that don't know, that is a historically Black university. So with that said, from campus recreation standpoint, it's provided me an opportunity to, offer these trips to students who, for whatever reason, haven't been exposed or haven't got the opportunity to, dive into these activities. So I'm working with, a group of students who are doing these things for the first time. So I like to see, that in a way it builds relationships between the students, because a lot of these activities, are team building activities. So whereas they wouldn't interact with these other students before, but now that they're out, whether it's rock climbing or whitewater rafting, they're, working together. So they're building relationships that way. And as far as the impact, I think it just creates awareness, because like I said, they haven't been exposed before, but now that we put them in this position, to experience these activities, now they know that they can do this on their own sometimes. It's encouraging after a trip sometimes where students may come to me and be like, hey, how much would this cost if I were to do it on my own with a group of friends? And that's what we want, just to let these students know that they can do this on their own.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Jackie, why don't you share with us?
Yeah, so I echo a lot of what Walter just said. I also work with most students who've certainly never been camping before, and probably have never even been hiking before, when we bring them out in the wilderness for the first time. And it's always really great to see how much they change over the course of the trip. So from the first night where, every twig snapping is something to be nervous about, to the end where everyone's excited to just sleep outside under the stars, not in a tent. And I think doing it all with a group of peers who are coming from a similar background and from similar experiences, also a great way to get more comfortable in your skin, and also to face some of the challenges in the wilderness, as well as to grow as a leader and as a team player. So I guess my biggest impression is how being out in nature can really bring out people's true personalities, allow people to open up about fears that they have, struggles that they have, and work through both personal issues as well as team issues, while learning about the environment simultaneously. I think it's a great place for all of that.
Yeah, I love that. Jackie, a colleague of mine, and I attended the parent presentation after the first gals, and that was just that was one of the funnest things for us to hear some of the stories about the girls, how timid they were at first, and by the end, they were self-sufficient and just fully bought into this. And I'll remember that for my entire life. That was certainly a highlight of mine. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, well, it's great to hear, Jackie, you and Walter discussing activities in that existed probably before COVID, and some of the best examples of communities coming together around recreation because of that. A lot of my board service really is post-pandemic reactionary stuff, but normally what Bike Durham would do is host events and group rides, and annually we coordinate the Bike Month in collaboration with the City of Durham's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, for example. And that brings together a diversity of different riding themes. Normally, this is a really great opportunity to bring together people and share together. So yeah.
Sean, I thought Bike Durham did something really cool during Bike Month, and what a cool pivot to address this COVID world. Can you talk just a little bit about that and how you all were able to engage with your community during that time?
Right. So that was interesting. So one of the first things we did was well, when I got on the board, one of the first things we did was we hosted an event at Duke and started talking to students about the needs that they had on campus for cycling. One of them was safe navigation of the streets, right? So there's like varying speeds for different roads, varying like shoulder sizes, varying access to bike lanes and stuff like that. And so students have particular concerns associated with like knowing how to navigate effectively, because it's not the same as just getting in a car or in some other vehicle. And then, so what we started to do during the pandemic was to build out a virtual navigation database for traveling across the city. And we basically built virtual versions of a virtual version of Bike Month. So that meant that we were able to, by creating a virtual version of it, we had events that would occur across time, and individuals would participate in them, socially distanced, time lagged. And then by tracking them over time, we would be able to aggregate them into a pooled digital collective community. And then we would celebrate them on social media. And so this is kind of a clever modification of a GPS navigation app modified for the conditions of the pandemic. But we're excited about a post-vaccine world where we can come back together and build the kind of narratives where, like Walter was saying, where a student says, I'd like to do this on my own, and I'd like to do this even more so. And what we want to see is people going through multiple steps of confidence levels with cycling, from I'm first learning to navigate on the streets to I'm confidently commuting now, or I'm confidently taking my recreational experience even further. Harder to sustain that during the pandemic, but we know that when this is over, we'll have the resources and we'll hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think COVID has had a huge impact on the outdoor industry, for good and for bad, and I definitely want to dive into that. And we're getting a few questions. Again, reminder: go ahead and drop questions in the Q&A. Thanks for those that have. Those are really great, and we're going to get to those. But I'd also like to talk about some of the barriers to outdoor recreation. We've talked a lot about the benefits and the transformative effects that it can have, but there are a lot of barriers. Access to the outdoors looks very different for people based on race, based on age, based on sex, based on gender, and the intersectionality of all of those different identities. So, I'd love to know from you all, from your experience, what are some of the biggest barriers to participation in outdoor recreation within the communities that you work with? And Sean, let's start with you on this one.
Well, safely navigating the streets, as I mentioned before, is the biggest one. That puts everyone in common relationship to the threat of potentially getting struck by a vehicle when mistakes happen. So that is a universal concern. But more specifically, we have certain things that make Durham special. For example, Durham has a higher ed revolving door of students that come in through Central and through Duke. And these students are onboarding into the experience of navigating Durham streets. And for cycling, that means there's a recurring communication gap for all students who are entering at the graduate and undergraduate level. But in addition, we have like historically underserved communities in Durham that have been denied direct investments in their neighborhoods, and also for cycling, for something very specifically, a long history of European style cycling that has all but until recently made no significant push to increase diversity. And so we've had distinct barriers to inclusion and diversity from the cycling world, and we have a lot of work to be done to kind of service communities and share our love for active transportation when we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Walter, what about you? You talked about how a lot of the students that you're working with coming from HBCU, this is the first time that they've engaged with the outdoors, and the outdoor industry as a whole is widely represented as male dominant, as white dominant. So what's that look like? What are some of the barriers that you've seen with the communities you work with?
I think on our end, half the battle is just getting the students to get outside of their comfort zone. So we post those flyers up around campus. They see skiing, they see rock climbing, things like that. They get a little intimidated. But what I've noticed, especially because the students, they hang out in groups. If we can get one of those students to sign up, as they're signing up, I'm always, we got some more spots. You got any friends that want to come? And a lot of times they can bring some of their friends in. And I just wanted to touch on one of our professors at the university is named Dr. Anthony Patterson. He did a study which was exploring outdoor recreation experiences and barriers to participation with African American college students. So I just picked out, I don't have the whole study here, but I picked out a couple of the barriers that the students listed. So one of them was just monetary constraints, just having the financials, of course, which is why as the Eagle Venture program, we do offer our trips at a much discounted rate. For instance, our ski trip, we typically go to Winter Place in West Virginia. And so for $40, we only charge $40. That's the transportation, lunch, your lift ticket and equipment rental. So yeah, financial accessibility is one that students listed. And on a smaller note, students picked out whether it's too hot or too cold, or precipitation that day. They listed that. And one thing, and we've seen this from our aquatics as well as barriers, is as far as like water recreation activities, is not being able to swim. So when we offer those, whitewater rafting or stand-up paddleboard or canoeing and kayaking, we get a lot of students who are a little reserved or held back because they don't know how to swim. Even if you're telling them you got the life vest and things like that, and we still have a lot of students who, hold back for that reason. But those are a few of the barriers that we do face there on campus with getting students to sign up.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Jackie, you in your role have primarily worked with underrepresented youth. So what have you seen there?
So I guess I would break my answer into three different buckets. One being accessibility, maybe a second being fear, and a third one being like companionship when doing it. And I think the first is similar to what I think Sean had touched on, is just having access to gear and having knowledge about what you're doing. And I think that's the first barrier to a lot of different activities. A lot of programs are extremely expensive to do in the first place. So finding activities where gear is either not needed or where it can be rented cheaply or for free is definitely an issue. And that's why GALS is usually attractive to students, because it is completely free and they are gaining that knowledge base. And a lot of college programs also, it sounds like NCCU has subsidized programming too, which makes it more affordable. And the second one is fear. I think that what wilderness means to different groups of people. There's a great book, Black Faces, White Spaces, that delves into this a bit more. But the wilderness for a lot of non-whites is a scary place where a lot of really awful things have happened in the past. And so overcoming what that means is really hard for a lot of people. And then for a lot of Latinx students, it's what their families have worked really hard to get away from. They've come to the United States. If they're first generation or second generation, they've often come to the US because they wanted to get away from being in the wilderness. And so sending their kids into the wilderness is also a scary thing and means something for them socioeconomically. And then the third thing is just having a companion. I know that I'm comfortable going for a bike ride alone, but I have friends who are non-white who would never bike through Durham or surrounding towns by themselves. And so just providing spaces and groups of people that can together do an activity to take away any stigma that might be associated with somebody doing, or any danger, I guess, that would be associated with somebody doing an activity by themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. And this has driven a lot of research, and researchers have coined a term called nature deficit disorder. And this references the idea that today's youth are spending less time outdoors. And the belief is that this is causing or contributing to a wide range of behavioral problems. There's another term that's been coined called the nature gap. And so a similar concept, but this references how people of color, families with children, and lower income communities are most likely to be deprived of the benefits that nature provides for a lot of the reasons that we've just addressed. So this is a really big question, but I'd love to get y'all's thoughts on how we address this. How do we address the nature gap? How do we address nature deficit disorder as an industry and work to provide more opportunities for underrepresented communities and youth to access the outdoors? Who wants to jump in?
I can start.
Yeah, Walter, that'd be great.
So, I mean, I think there should just be an overall push just to bring awareness to the nature gap itself and, the nature deficit. From there, like schools, groups, or like organizations can be more intentional with their programming, not only just to introduce that to the youth in the outdoor recreation. So I grew up going to the Boys and Girls Club, and, we had some outdoor stuff like that. But like I said, I just think there needs to be an intentional push to the program, especially in those areas that aren't naturally exposed to those areas. I mean, those outdoor programs.
Yeah, I love that, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but I think that's one of the benefits of a university program like Eagle Ventures and the one that we have at Duke and throughout North Carolina. We've got a really robust community of collegiate outdoor programs, and these programs are privileged enough to have access to resources, to have access to equipment, to be able to run subsidized trips, to keep them low cost and to keep that access there. And that's one of the things that we've talked about is how can we collaborate within our communities and doing exactly what you're talking about, trying to collaborate with Boys and Girls Clubs, and helping to establish programs like GALS that work to get folks outdoors. So I certainly think that's a start. But Jackie, what would you say?
Well, I 100% agree with what Walter said. And then I think the next step is making sure that people are aware of the programs. I think one of the things I've noticed from most of the students who participate in GALS is that they've signed up after the recommendation of a trusted mentor, whether it's a teacher or a guidance counselor or a friend or a community leader. And so making sure that these opportunities are are shared with people in a broad network, and then that people can get excited about them and then share them with students of all different ages. In particular, I think getting people when they're younger to get really excited about these activities so they can continue to do them and realize the benefits of nature from a younger age, and then bring in their friends too. As Walter was saying earlier, like once one person signs up, then their friends either will join in that same activity or hear all about it when they get back. And then that's how you get more and more people joining in. And the other thing I would add is making sure our advertisement is inclusive. A lot of images are of white males doing a lot of the activities, and having someone see someone who looks like them in a picture or in a video, like there are so many really badass people from all different backgrounds, all different gender identities who are involved in outdoor recreation. And we always tend to show the same images over and over again. So making sure that we can show that anyone can do these activities, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And the industry as a whole is really guilty of that. It's exactly like you said, it's represented by generally white males. And, I love the concept of really trying to create awareness. We hear that a lot with our program. Students won't get involved until maybe their senior year, and they'll have an incredible experience and then say, I wish I would have known about this when I was younger. So that seems to be something that a lot of us struggle with, is really creating that awareness and, and pulling folks in. Sean, what have you observed?
So when I heard you wanted to talk about the nature gap and this deficit, what first came to mind for me was a story that made that ring true. So just recently, Bike Durham was facilitating a bike ride in coordination with the city of Durham. And I met a young boy named Adrian, who's 12 years old. He lives around the Oxford Manor area, which is a low-income public housing managed by the Durham Housing Authority. He told me 3 weeks ago, basically, that he likes biking more than his friends who prefer to play video games. That's part of the concern here in the background. And on our bike ride, many of his friends also told me they were surprised how much fun they had on the ride. And one kid, I think, really surprised me when he said that he hadn't spent this much time outside in weeks, and we were only outside at that point for 2 hours. And accessibility is a real problem. So when we worked to coordinate this for a couple dozen children to have an organized group ride, first off, they didn't have helmets. We had to help coordinate getting them helmets. A lot of their bikes needed tune-ups, so there was a real maintenance concern, and the Durham Co-op was really essential in helping pull that off. They weren't sure how to even ride bikes in the streets because there wasn't really a kind of their parents weren't passing this down, so it's really hard to kind of like build from the ground up this knowledge base. And when we did arrive at nearby parks to show them the area, some of them had never even visited, and these were really close by parks, which really speaks to kind of how some communities don't feel like they're able to travel. So the event, though, was broadly a success. The Durham Police Department was also there, shepherding us around the city and blocking traffic so that the kids felt safe in the streets and they can learn little safety cues. But little stories like that can't just be a one-hit wonder. We can't just like expect to do inspiration and then run away from these kind of communities. We need real reinvestment and transformation, and we need to be willing to put in the work and actually consistently show up and share and learn from each other. And so I think that's what that story was hopefully meant to make me think of when I started to read more about the nature gap.
Yeah. Yeah, Sean, you said something that kind of brought me back to something Jackie had mentioned earlier, and to her point that, the image matters and that representation matters. And I think, not only does the outdoor industry predominantly display white males, but it also displays high adventure, right? And so going back to this barrier being fear or maybe a lack of knowledge, it's, I think a big part of that is because what is represented is these fearful activities at the top of a mountain, when in reality, the outdoors is in our backyard, just like you touched on, Jackie. For me, visiting a park or walking a greenway with my daughter brings that same sense of reflection, that same sense of healing as as a backpacking trip may bring. So I think it's really important that as professionals in the industry, we try and turn that image and help folks understand that you don't have to go into the backcountry to be outdoors, and we can gain all of these benefits, just by being at our local resources. And that's something that we've really seen, especially lately. COVID has kind of turned this upside down and has forced us to reconnect with our local trails, with our, even the sidewalks on our street, just spending time outside, getting out. And Sean, you had mentioned the story of that student who, just a few hours outside is more time outside than he had been in the past week. And, I think that's probably true, especially during quarantine. So, as a result of this, as a result of COVID, we've seen significant increase in engagement with outdoor recreational activities. People have turned to the outdoors as an alternative space for recreation and fitness. And it feels in a lot of ways we're reestablishing our connection to the outdoors. The amount of people that we've seen visiting local and state parks have significantly increased. If you're local and you've been to the American Tobacco Trail on a weekend, it's almost like visiting a mall, the amount of people that you'll see out there. The bike industry has seen an incredible boom. I think this is a perfect example of kind of what's happening now. People are rediscovering the power of biking. And, if you visit a local bike shop, you're going to be, waiting for, up to a month, if not more, for service. If you're trying to purchase a new bike, you're going to be waiting into 2021. So, as an outdoor professional, it's exciting to see this. It's exciting to see people connecting with this. But with this, increase in usage comes issues, overcrowding, erosion of natural resources, misuse of outdoor spaces. So from where you all sit, how has COVID impacted outdoor recreation for you, personally, professionally, for better or worse? And Jackie, why don't we start with you?
So my first reaction is just looking at the faces that I pass as I go for hikes or walk along the alveolar trail. And I'm definitely starting to see more of a diversity of people. I would say in the past, I tended to pass predominantly people in their 20s and 30s who were white. And there's a much greater age range now, as well as people of color as well, and not just people who look like me on the trails, which is really exciting. I do think it's really great that people are using it, and I think that this pushes the need that we need to have more places that are accessible. If we look at the statistics, it's generally in higher socioeconomic neighborhoods where we do have access to a lot of the outdoor places. And so making sure that there is access to outdoors spaces in lower socioeconomic places as well, I think is really important. And this is, I guess, somewhat related, but I think also thinking about like national park entry fees and the cost of entering into national parks is also often prohibitive to a lot of people who live near them. So even though we're seeing a surge in people using national parks, it tends to be people who are not local and people who can afford to go there. And so just making sure that while there is an increase in COVID, everyone can equally have access to these spaces, and ensuring that this access and this desire for the outdoors continues after COVID too. So I think that there are pros and cons to it.
Absolutely. Walter, what do you think?
Yeah, so I know Chris, you can speak on this too. From a campus rec standpoint, COVID has brought a halt to a lot of our programs, especially with us not being able to travel as a group. But at the same time, it's allowed me to do more research on outdoor programs that we may be able to do in the spring, or just trying to get creative to where we can add that piece back into our programming. And as far as the students, like you said, with them being in quarantine, being in their room so much, now they're looking for any activity to get outside. Before we opened our fitness center around September, we was doing pop-up gyms outside. So we brought some fitness equipment outside, and it was pretty successful. We had more people using, the fitness equipment outside. We had more people than we thought, but it also made us realize, like, hey, even when, all this is over, we still can add that into our program, having some equipment outside, or we've added some group exercise classes outside where we didn't have them before. But, moving forward, I think we will keep those classes outside, some classes outside. But like I said, the negative effect is, it cut the programs, but like you said, it's pushed more people outside to do more things. But on the other side, is, like you said, is some of those spaces are getting overused now. So you see the best of both worlds with COVID right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, what have you seen?
Well, so Bike Durham started with a kind of a staggered approach to handling the pandemic. The first problem with the pandemic was that nobody had masks and everyone had too much toilet paper. So basically, one of the things Bike Durham did early on was try to collect as many masks as possible and give them away for free at public transportation stops, which was a really great place to kind of coordinate between people who were onboarding into vehicles en masse, but also communities who may be using public transportation because they don't have the discretionary income or don't want to use that discretionary income for cars and other larger vehicles. And then kind of a stage two started to emerge, which was how do we build back in cycling into socially distant spaces. And I already mentioned this earlier, Chris, when you kind of circled to that, which was to build out an app-based themed rides that allowed for people to participate individually, but digitally we were able to collect and aggregate each other into a virtual communal space. And so that's how we have been addressing the pandemic. We have also had a couple very successful in-person group rides. And just for, I think we can abstract off of this some outdoor recreation themes, which is one, track registration, cap registration, split up groups when necessary, socially distanced through the groups, which is kind of how we handle it, using even a small PA system, like a small PA system helps people feel more comfortable keeping space because you're projecting your voice loud enough, especially if you're already wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. So, you've got the mask on, which makes it harder to hear. And a little PA system really helps everyone feel comfortable hearing. So these are just some of the concerns associated with trying to successfully navigate this space, but it's been a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to jump into one of the questions from our audience and get your perspective. Where do you see the outdoor education or the outdoor industry going past COVID? What does this look like on the other side of this? Sean, you want to kick it off?
Well, I think that during COVID, we had a magnification of equitable concerns associated with systemic neglect of underrepresented and disinvested communities. And so COVID compounded into this, and George Floyd's murder lit a spark. And so now it's really important that we work our narrative to be as inclusive as possible. So I think our educational concerns, I think Jackie's already mentioned sort of this, is that there are people of varying ethnicities doing incredible things in all spaces. It's just important from a marketing perspective to highlight those voices and not just revert to stock imagery of a legacy of narrow thinking on some things. That's true for cycling too. So that would be my first pass at something like that.
Walter, Jackie, any thoughts you have on that as far as what this looks like on the post-COVID?
What I'm really hoping is there's a big push, I think, right now for people to engage in outdoor activities of all different sorts. And so I'm hoping that momentum continues after COVID, that people realize that they enjoy using the outdoor spaces that maybe they weren't previously using, and that there are more opportunities for people to get engaged, more infrastructure developed, more programs like Bike Durham that are making cities commutable and bikeable, and more ways to get people outside who maybe before had barriers of some sort. And I hope that there will be both a private industry and a governmental push to continue to have these sorts of spaces, and to be able to do them now in a more communal way, as opposed to people going out individually during COVID to do them.
Yeah.
Yeah, from my standpoint, it's like my title is informal recreation as facilities and aquatics. And the Eagle Ventures part has always been the smaller portion because it was only going 4 trips, maybe the school year. But now, after COVID, hopefully, our Eagle Venture programs expands more, getting out in the community more, just more than our normal trips that we normally do, connecting with some of you guys, being that you guys are local, seeing what we can do, adding the, hopefully getting a bike club and things like that. So expanding our program at the school, and hopefully, it can expand out farther than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say this in addition? The pandemic allowed for humanity to run one of the greatest experiments of all time, which is basically to shut down the massive engine of a certain kind of commerce that was associated with pollution. And one great thing about outdoor recreation is that it's really connected to conservation. There's so much of outdoor recreation that doesn't require a large carbon footprint. And, humanity ran through this massive accelerated industrialization. And then all of a sudden there's this blip in the big data, which shows that a lot of people stopped driving, or a lot of people shut down certain forms of pollution that were just running exponentially. And it's really great to see that, because we can have that might be the future if we can just kind of continue to harness the energy we had to connect the dots on those topics. And so outdoor recreation can really help lead the way towards more sustainable practices as more and more people choose it, as opposed to a kind of a more commercialized consumption connected with forms of entertainment that are just non-sustainable.
Yeah, yeah, Sean, you said that beautifully. Yeah, and again, kind of going back to this idea, we're seeing a significant increase in users of these outdoor spaces, and we're seeing what our world looks like if we maybe pause and slow down a little bit and take a minute to explore our local areas and to get outside and to to spend time outdoors. So as users of these spaces, these outdoor spaces increase, what can we do to be better advocates for these spaces and to fight for access to outdoor recreation opportunities in lower socioeconomic areas, or within communities that maybe haven't traditionally have had access in the past? Jackie, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll repeat some of the things I said earlier, but I think as an outsider to a community, it's most important to get people who are trusted by that community to be the advocates for the program, or whatever outdoor activity it is. The same idea of like colonialism of coming in and saying, come do this activity. I think it's really important to ensure that you have the trust before doing something that is potentially scary or different or outside of someone's comfort zone. So finding advocates within a community who can encourage people to partake in these activities. And then again, I think making sure that our imagery is inclusive, and that there are a wide variety of activities, and that we're not just pitching those most extreme sports as we talked about earlier, but making sure that everyone, regardless of what outdoor recreation activity they decide to partake in, is considered within the outdoor industry, and then providing more opportunities for free or heavily subsidized ways to participate, more like gear loan programs, more reusing gear rather than having to buy all your gear new. I think there needs to be a lot more programs. Like Patagonia has wornwear, but that's still pretty expensive. So finding ways to have there be less of a cost to entry into these activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Walter, Sean, anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's just being intentional with the programs. Not only getting our students involved, but our students are required to get a certain amount of community service hours before they graduate. So once we bring those students in, hopefully they can go out and seek, some of these younger kids in the area and maybe participate in some outdoor activities that way. I know just recently we had a summer camp, a youth summer camp out on campus called Eagle Play. And it was the Men's Achievement Center on campus was running the camp, but Campus Rec provided the recreational activities, for the youth. And he was really adamant on not giving these kids like the typical activities, like no basketball, no football. So instead, we did things like we did some archery that summer. We did a lot of hiking, a lot of walking, just did a lot of trails. But I think it's things like that, especially in the surrounding areas around North Carolina Central, going out and targeting these areas who, again, not typically exposed, and then just giving them those activities.
Yeah, absolutely. We just got a comment that I think touches to what you're talking about. And this person said, maybe there's an opportunity for students of color to become community advocates and leaders to bring outdoors to minority communities. And absolutely. And as a university program that has the ability to do things like that, I think it's really important that we start or continue having these conversations and thinking about these. Sean, anything else you'd like to jump in with?
Yeah, I think following up on that thought is just like, how can white allies be of service in this space? And the answer is kind of to focus on service-oriented leadership and not just stepping in and trying to correct course for any given community. So for example, identifying within a community their own leadership opportunities, and then basically just shouldering any logistical or tedious problems that could be associated with helping that leader get into the position to do the work. And that can give white allies like a really great opportunity to feel invested, to feel supportive, but to really let leadership come out organically. Felicia in the comments just mentioned about it's important that leaders be authentic when encouraging communities of color. And authenticity, is a really rich concept. It's connected back to also themes that we mentioned earlier, was like authenticity is born out through like continually serving. Like you can't just do like a one-hit wonder and then peace out. So there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's and a lot of different recreational activities are going to need a slightly different surgical approach to figuring that out.
Yeah, absolutely. We're running out of time here, so I'd like to kind of wrap up our conversation with this question, and it's a big one, and I hope that our attendees can reflect on this and think about this as we work to be better advocates for the outdoors and users of these spaces. But from your perspective, what is the power of the outdoors? What does that mean? And I'll open it to anybody that wants to jump in first.
So I'll throw one out real quick. So I really started to obsess over the power of the outdoors when the way you're on the bicycle forces you to stop engaging with technology, because there's so much of the modern experience that's bound up with cell phones and the connectivity of social spaces that we often end up in wonderful moments out in nature, and we feel too compelled to re-engage through devices and through the things that humans create. And so I started to particularly meditate on this topic because you have to hold the bicycle. You can't be on your phone. And that was something special for me. But you don't have to be on a bike to appreciate that. You can just be super intentional about it. But there have been moments when I've showed up at a sunset with my wife and I, we're photographers, where there's just a string of people on their phones engaging. But every sunset has an arc of color, an arc of contrast. And if you're willing to pay attention to it, you'll see all of the hues eventually. But if you just disengage and re-engage, you miss that a little bit. And so I would say that the power of the outdoors is kind of like, we need to think about technology and put it in its proper place.
I love that, Sean.
Yeah, I like that Sean brought up the technology piece, because it's so easy to get caught up in technology, especially even like us now, or the youth. I have a 5-year-old daughter she can stay on her tablet for 24 hours if I let her. So, and just seeing her on, these technology devices, it prompted me to like, all right, let's just go for a walk or something. Just try to, reverse that technology effect that it has on us. But yeah, and I know that being outdoors, I don't know the scientifics of it, but I know there's such positive and so many benefits in just being outdoors and, in the sun. I have a background in fitness. So during the quarantine, when all the gyms went down, I started working out outside in my garage, and it just felt so natural, and it felt good to be outdoors. And even again, now that the gyms are open back up, I still find myself working outside, working on the weekends and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, Walter, absolutely. And I think, when you really think about why have we seen such an increase of users in outdoor spaces during COVID, I think that's the answer, is people are realizing how good it feels just to step outside, whether you're going for a walk, a run, a bike ride, whether you're rock climbing, whatever it may be. There's a lot of power in that. Jackie, what do you think?
So definitely agree with Sean and Walter, especially the technology piece. But I think the power of the outdoors is that it provides everyone with something different, and it's hard to guess what that thing will be. And maybe just a small anecdote: when I started my undergraduate, your freshman year is always stressful and overwhelming. And I would tell myself that every night I had to look up and see the stars. And if I forgot to check them out for a few days, that meant that like my life was just really overwhelming and I needed to reground myself. And so that's something just like very simple, just walking across campus, remembering to look up. But that really helped me to like make it through freshman year. And I continue to do that. And I still try to remind myself to do that. So I think just finding what the power of it is to you and how that can help improve your life or whatever capacity, I think is really special about it.
Oh, Jackie, I love that. And, that made me think about climbing trips. Like we'll run a lot of intro climbing trips. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard folks get to the bottom of a climb and be like, I forgot to look around. I forgot to take in the view. And then they do. And they're like, this is amazing. So yeah, I think maybe we'll leave it at that. Like, don't forget to stop, smell the roses, look at the stars, and embrace that healing power. Well, thank you all. I can't thank you enough. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed all the work getting up to this point. Y'all bring a lot to the table. And thank you for everything you're doing within your communities. And thank you for everything that you're doing here. Thanks everyone for being here. We will resume RecTalks in January. So, visit our website, recreation.duke.edu for updated topics. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up. So any students watching, good luck with finals. And thank you all. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.